I'm really curious how they actually power that hot tub. Is that thing like, because it didn't appear to be any like electrical work anywhere or any plumbing anywhere near there. I mean, maybe there was like a shed right around the corner or something like that, but I was really distracted. I didn't hear any of the conversation because I was trying to work out the mechanics and plumbing of it from what we could see. Very distracting.
Is that your Roman Empire?
I don't understand the reference. What is that, a social media thing? You have to explain it to me.
Remember, I asked you how often you think about the Roman Empire?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
How can you not think about the Roman Empire all the time? It's literally why are you laughing? I don't understand the question. Like, I'm missing something. What explain to me? Why?
Reality therapist perception.
Bachelorette. Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I am not a licensed therapist, but I have some opinions about this show, and she was gracious enough to let me voice some of them on this podcast.
Though something tells me I'm going to regret that.
Maybe a little bit this episode.
But before we get into our episode, just wanted to give a reminder to like this video and to also subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is such a small thing, but it actually goes a really long way, and we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, also hit the bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel.
A lot is coming your way, so you're going to want to subscribe.
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on this week's episode?
Yeah, this is going to be an episode where I'm going to be much more critical of Gerry. Last week, I was a little critical of him, and I'm going to be even more this week. I thought he demonstrated some really poor judgment moments, a couple of moments where he kind of had a weak back, as we talked about last week. Didn't love a lot of his decision-making. You know, I think production has done a really good job of setting him up with some really great high value women. And so if he just like throws a dart against the board and ends up with one of these women, he's just statistically speaking going to end up with a wonderful woman because they're all above average for what you get out in the dating pool. But the thing about this show and about Gerry specifically is that he's really supposed to be demonstrating, becoming a new icon for those of, you know, an older age and how they can approach dating and you know, what they can, you know, how they can find love, you know, once you are in your 60s and 70s. And one of my issues here is that I feel like some of the things that Gerry has done in this episode and last episode is not setting a good model for what people that don't have a production company handpicking women for them are going to be successful in copying. Mm-hmm. I think that's my biggest problem.
Damn. Okay, this episode opens up and there are 9 women remaining. They go on a group date to play pickleball. And then we get a one-on-one date where Leslie and Gerry go ATVing and have their typical date in a hot tub in the middle of nowhere. We end with a cocktail party, a self-elimination, and a rose ceremony. Are we ready to actually get into this episode?
Yeah.
Okay, so we open up with a group date, and the thing that I found was hilarious about this is we've been watching the women kind of react to the elements on the show that we as viewers have become so accustomed to. And so, you know, one week it was Jesse dropping the date card and the women are like, wait, you're not going to open it? We need to open it. And usually the date card is some sort of riddle or gives like some clue about what the date is going to be. This time the date card literally said, let's play some pickleball. So not much left to the imagination. They told them right up front, they're going to play pickleball.
Which is a big thing with this crowd. Apparently Gerry plays pickleball.
Yes,
and
huge part of his lifestyle, his livelihood. So we weren't the only ones that didn't necessarily know much about pickleball. There were certainly like pros on these women's teams. Like Ellen, literally her Chiron the entire time has said co-captain of her pickleball team. So like she knew what she was doing, but there were other women that like had no idea. And so they enlisted the help of our upcoming Bachelor, Joey, who's a tennis pro. And we also saw Trista, who was our first ever Bachelorette, join the ladies to help kind of referee and judge the pickleball game, which was kind of nice. And so the women are divided into a few teams, with the prize being getting a cover of a Pickleball magazine.
And more importantly, though, I think is they also won the first ever Pickleball Bachelor Nation trophy, and they would each earn a kiss from Gerry.
That's right. Yes.
Those are important rewards you're leaving out there.
No,
screw the magazine.
That's fair.
I want the kiss and the trophy.
And we see some of the ladies get really competitive. They get creative. April, puts her.
I was going to say, you said some of the women know what they're doing. Some of the women don't know what they're doing. Well, I can tell you the woman who knew what she was doing was April. When she took that dive, oh, ouch, ouch. Gerry, come and console me. We've seen this before.
I love how she broke the fourth wall and looked at the camera and winked.
Yeah.
And that was great. I mean, we see that almost every time that there is some sort of sporting event. There's always some wounded bird that the lead comes over and consoles.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they just don't rack up people on the IR. For those watching, IR is the injury reserve in professional sports. So I'm just surprised you just don't have a whole bench of the girls just being like, I'm hurt. It's my turn to nestle up right here, Gerry, or whoever said Bachelor is at any given time. Meanwhile, on the flip side, I'm sure when you have a Bachelorette, there is nobody going on IR. These guys are, you have a broken leg and they're dragging themselves down the field, so to speak.
Yeah, it gets pretty rough, and they keep pushing through, being a man. And so we have, women using all sorts of ways to try to win Gerry's affection and attention, but also win the game. Ultimately, it comes down to Nancy and Sandra versus Kathy and Ellen, and Kathy and Ellen win it.
Not shocking, because we know Ellen is a co-captain, which I don't. Can we back up for a second here? From what I saw, the teams are 2. Wouldn't that automatically make you a co-captain?
Fair point. Yeah. And then the other thing that kind of gets revealed to us is that on this day, it is the wedding day of Sandra's daughter.
Yes. I had a lot of feelings about this, and they were not positive. I think this was one area where Gerry really kind of misplayed the situation. I have real questions about, how Sandra could actually miss her daughter's wedding. I feel like production really tried to glamorize this and try to almost celebrate it in some way. And I just didn't see it that way. When you look at, say, the nuclear family, the most important relationship within a nuclear family are actually the parents' relationship, right? That comes first, and the relationship parents to children comes second. And the reason for that is because the parents are the model for what the kids will become when they get older. And if the parents have the best relationship, then that means that they are in lockstep in terms of decision making, and they will make the best decisions for their children. That's why it's always the parents have the primary relationship in the nuclear family is the parents, and then it's parent to child secondary. But when the nuclear family no longer exists because of any reason, widowing or divorce or something like that, then the primary relationship transfers parent to child. Okay. And that's a situation that both Gerry and Sandra are in right now. Now, here's my problem with this situation. And I'm gonna contrast it against Joan from last week. Joan said some things that were really important and I think really inspirational. And that was something: you never stop being a parent. I need to go home and be a parent. And I applaud her for that, because it demonstrates what I view as good parenting. Your kids always come first. In this situation, Sandra put herself first, and I am sympathetic to that. I also cannot fathom how any parent would miss such an important special day for their child as a wedding day to put themselves first. You had said some stuff about Joan last week. You got a little bit emotional, and you had said, hadn't she done enough, or hadn't she deserved her own time? And something didn't sit perfectly right with me when you were saying that, but I didn't really have the words at the time to vocalize it. But my response is no, absolutely not. When you're a parent, that becomes more important than yourself. That is a sacrifice you make as a parent. And you never stop being a parent. And what Joan did was correct. And what Sandra did, in my personal opinion, was completely disqualifying. If I were Gerry and I was told by a woman, I missed my child's wedding to be here with you, I would sit her on a plane and send her home, hopefully in time to make it to that wedding. Because I think it demonstrates a level of selfishness that you as a parent are not allowed to have.
Well, you don't have enough information to give an assessment or a critique on her parenting. However, what I will say is, why are you looking at me like that?
I'm just looking at you. I like when you get feisty.
Well, it's more like, I'm getting activated because what you are doing is a problem, and it's a problem that we in the world have, in that we have one narrow set of information and we try to create a wide assessment based on that narrow piece of information. I don't know. We don't know enough. We only know what we see. And I don't have enough evidence to support what type of parent she is. There's too many question marks. However, what I do know is that, okay, yes, if you were in Gerry's position, of course, that would be a disqualifying factor for you, and you would probably want to send her home. It became a question mark for me about Gerry. This is where my critique came in, because we know how strongly he values family. Exactly. We know his views on being a parent. We literally just heard him say last week that, being a parent comes first. He has to prioritize that. And so it did feel like a values misalignment keeping Sandra, given the information that we saw, given what we've learned from Gerry about Gerry and about his view on parenting. That's where I'll agree with you and say, okay, this feels a little bit like a values misalignment here.
Would Gerry have missed, if Gerry says the franchise says to Gerry, you get to be the first Golden Bachelor. Oh, by the way, you're going to miss your daughter's wedding. Is Gerry going on that show?
No,
absolutely not. I just, nothing in his character demonstrates that he would go on that show. Mm-hmm. So I completely agree. It is a values misalignment with Sandra. Mm-hmm. And you're right. We don't have all of the information. Do I have to make certain judgment calls? Absolutely. But the reality is there is actually enough information there. It generates enough red flags, and doesn't matter how many things you say, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. The reality is that I could probably demonstrate a dozen red flags, and there's no way she's going to be able to answer all of them to my satisfaction. And that's why she'd be disqualifying for me. And I don't understand that Gerry seems to have some fairly traditional value systems in place. I don't understand how it was not disqualifying for him.
The thing about the way Gerry engaged with it that I did not like, and the way that Sandra also reacted to it. So Gerry comes over and he is like, I've got a treat for you. We're going to FaceTime your daughter on her wedding day. And Sandra's like, oh my God, can you believe this man? How amazing. And this is where I had like an audible reaction when we were watching, and you were like, no, Amy, save it for the pod. But I was like, this is the fucking least he can do. And I did not like the way that he framed it to her. Like, yes, I'm going to do you a favor. And
that was my other problem.
I'm going to let you speak to your daughter. And I was just like, ooh, I don't like that. Like, it should be an of course. It's your daughter's wedding day. You're here. Let's call her. Of course we would call her. Of course I still want you to be part of her day, even though you're here. How can we get you involved in your daughter's big day? Because that's Gerry's value.
So, spoiler.
If it's a spoiler, then you shouldn't be watching this show.
Yeah. Gerry gives her the group date rose, which was as baffling to me as giving Kathy the sympathy rose last week. This, again, we talked about it last week. These just handing out roses that are not deserved. Handing out roses after somebody demonstrates tremendous red flags. I hated every part of this. I hated the way Gerry handled it. I hated the fact that Sandra was even part of the show and missing her daughter's wedding. Well, I hated everything about it.
Well, like the thing about like last week, it felt like he was rewarding Kathy's I don't even know what.
Anxiety?
Something. And this week, yeah, he had said, I want to give this rose to someone who made a big sacrifice to be here. But the roses aren't for that, though. The roses are, this is a symbol of me saying that I see a connection with you and I'm inviting you to take our connection a step further. That's what the rose symbolizes. It's not a reward for sharing something difficult. It's not a reward for sacrificing something. It's a symbol of, I see a connection with you. I see you as someone potentially to be my future partner. And you saying yes means you do too. That's what the agreement is with the rose, not this. I was not happy with that.
Yeah. So we're in agreement that for very different reasons, we did not like this Sandra, Gerry interaction.
Just want to take a quick moment to let you know that at Revive, we are hiring in our Miami and Pittsburgh offices. We have full and part-time clinician positions open, both 1099 and W-2 positions. And in our Connecticut offices, we are hiring for full-time W-2 clinician positions. And if you want to work in an organization that values support, empowerment, personal and professional growth, and being part of a community, then definitely check out the link in our show notes and apply. We'd love to meet you. One other thing happens at the pickleball after party.
They called it an after party, yeah.
We see Teresa and Kathy again trying to hash out their drama. And I think part of it is, Teresa wants to clear the air, wants to smooth everything out. Kathy basically says, just don't talk to me about these things. When you talk to me about your relationship, it gives me anxiety. So I need you to zip it. And I had written down as I was watching this, is Kathy simply setting boundaries, or is this something different?
So it's interesting you say that, because I actually in this episode was on Kathy's side, and we know I don't particularly care for Kathy. I was on her side. Teresa pulled her aside. Why? Because she wants to clear the air. And again, you've talked about this in the past, where sometimes you do things for yourself, pretending like it's for somebody else, right? And I felt like that's what Teresa's doing. I need to feel better. This is really a selfish thing. I'm going to pull Kathy aside to clear the air so everything is good. This had nothing to do with Kathy. This had her, kind of her discomfort and trying to deal with her own issues, right?
And probably some people pleasing type stuff.
Yeah. And Kathy doesn't want to hear it. Kathy has made it abundantly clear. And I thought for the most part, the first 75% of what we saw of their interaction, I was 100% on Kathy's side. It's, Teresa, I'm giving you the boundaries with which I am asking. I'm trying not to be rude, but I'm being very blunt about it. And Teresa just keeps going in and keeps going and keeps going. And she does it in this nice mousy sort of way where, it's yeah, I understand you've tried to explain yourself. I am telling you my limits and my boundaries for what I want to hear. You can disagree with those boundaries. That is perfectly fine. But the fact that, you are not acknowledging, all you have to say, Teresa, is, I understand that makes you uncomfortable. I won't talk about those things in front of you anymore. But she is in many ways, and Kathy said this last episode, and I do agree with her. Teresa is a bit oblivious. She's sort of oh, I don't even know what I'm saying or doing, and I just want everyone to like me. And there doesn't really appear to be an awareness. And I thought until the last 25% of it, Kathy was getting aggravated, and then she started to get a little more aggressive, and that's when she breached into a section of inappropriateness. But I can understand how she got there, because she just keeps repeating herself in what I viewed was a very clear manner. These are my boundaries. Please respect my boundaries. You say you're a nice person. You say you mean well. You say you're not vindictive. You say you're not malicious. So I'm telling you my boundaries, and all you want to keep doing is talking about you, and how you feel, and how you didn't feel you did this, and how you didn't do it. It's okay, great. I understand you don't feel like you did anything malicious. I'm telling you, I took it as malicious. And as a result, just say, I understand. I'll stop saying these things, and it's over. How far off am I?
No, I mean, that's why I had written down Kathy is drawing a boundary. And I think she continues to, at least in this exchange, she gets more aggressive and reactive because Teresa continues to not understand. It's like not computing in some way. And so we see her get reactive. And I think, like we talked about, like Teresa is kind of like a little like puppy that you can kick. And I think Kathy sees an opportunity to do that. We noticed that later when, or maybe it was right before this, Ellen kissing Gerry, she doesn't have that reaction.
She just goes out, spies on him, shows a little anxiety over it, but it's not. There's something specific about Teresa that's triggering to Kathy. Yeah.
Right. And we don't see her have that reaction later on at the cocktail party when it's Susan.
I was gonna say, she specifically asks to see the gift. Spoiler, Susan's gonna get a gift, and Kathy goes and specifically asks to see the gift. I wrote that down as well. These are clearly in complete contrast to her response to Teresa. So there's something about Teresa that is triggering to Kathy.
Ellen and Susan are much more confident, just like secure, self-assured women, where that's not how Teresa comes off. And it's almost like Kathy is picking up on that like insecure, like it's transferring to her. It's really interesting to watch it happen because when she's seeing these gestures by these confident, bold women, she's still standing sturdy and firm. But when it's Teresa, it really unravels her. Gerry gets back involved. He checks in with Teresa on how things are going. Teresa tells him that Kathy was just rude to her and told her to zip it.
Did you agree with that interpretation? Oh, and by the way, she didn't say zip. She told me to snip it.
Oh, right. She did. Yes. She used the wrong word. Yeah. It seemed accurate. Yeah or no? I
disagree.
Why?
I think that, like I said, I think last week we saw Kathy get really aggressive with her in a very inappropriate manner. I think this week Kathy came and was quite appropriate. She wasn't the one who instigated the conversation. 75% of that conversation was Kathy setting her boundary, and I thought a very appropriate way. It was the last 25% where it's just going nowhere and just frustration happening. And I'm blaming that on Teresa. That is like, this is like 90-10 Teresa's fault, this interaction.
Okay. So she tells Gerry about that. That then causes Gerry to go talk to Kathy about what happened. And Kathy was forthcoming and actually essentially said, I lost my patience and I told her to zip it. She used the word she told on herself, which was a high character moment.
I thought she gave a very accurate portrayal of what had actually happened. Yeah.
Right. And Gerry, you could tell, was pretty turned off by this because Kathy was trying to explain to him, actually at the rose ceremony, and she narrated for us what we saw last week from the rose ceremony about Gerry going to comfort Teresa in her room, and then Gerry said, "But I comforted you when you were upset, and I actually gave you a rose." And so he was like pretty invalidating of Kathy and her feelings, and basically saying, "I gave both of you attention, so why are you upset?"
I'm happy you brought this up because I wanted to ask you about this. My interpretation of this was that you used the word invalidating. I think that's probably the right word. She was saying, I was trying to set a boundary and that boundary was not being respected and I lost my patience. And it had nothing to do with Gerry. It had nothing to do with Gerry. And once again, you've brought this up several times. Gerry kind of keeps bringing it back to himself. And this was like the third situation in the last 2 episodes.
There's another one coming.
And I thought that was another demonstration where I got to be critical of Gerry. I thought his handling of the situation was very poor. In just the way that he approached Kathy. And again, like I'm not a Kathy fan. But like a broken clock is still right twice a day. And Kathy was right here. And so, last week, it felt like Gerry took Kathy's side over Teresa's side without any evidence. And this time, he basically does the exact opposite. I didn't love it. So like what's going on for Gerry? Why does he keep doing it? Is this the producers? Is this going to his head? Is it multiple weeks now where he's just like, you know, the center of attention, and so it's just going to his head? Like what's happening?
Well, I mean, in some ways, how could he not make it all about him? Like it is all about him. And at the same time, I think he takes a lot of responsibility, and he is quite responsible in some ways for the dynamics that exist in the group.
Mhm.
And that's what we've been talking about in some ways. And so it makes sense that he would have this kind of egocentric view around what's happening, because this world actually does revolve around him
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. So it's not surprising that he is thinking about things in relation to himself. In this interaction, my take was more, he's tired of it and just wants to shut it down.
Mhm.
And so he's kind of lost his patience here. And he's being a little bit more reactive
Mhm.
than he might be if he were not so frustrated and probably exhausted and all of those things that make us more vulnerable. Let's talk now about the one-on-one date with Leslie and Gerry. They go ATVing, and then they, of course, in typical Bachelor fashion, they end up in a hot tub in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I thought it was really weird that they just dropped Leslie off in this middle of the desert and she's just kind of standing around. And this does not look like a nice location. And just like kind of hanging out type thing. It's like the level of trust required here. She didn't strike me as an ATVer, and once she hopped onto the back of one of those things, I think we saw why. I thought it was interesting when Gerry was like, there's no one I would rather be doing this with than you. And I'm like, there's at least 3 girls in the house that I think are better suited to this particular one-on-one date than Leslie. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's about getting people out of their comfort zone, or maybe it's, about, this is somebody I could see myself with. This is an interest of mine. How are they gonna respond to that type of thing?
Oh, I thought it was more about, this is a woman who I want with her arms wrapped around me while I'm driving an ATV. And this is a woman who I want in a bathing suit in a hot tub to be next to.
I'm not disputing that those were factors and considerations as well. So one of the things about, this kind of date is, and we've talked about this in the past, it's not a great date. You're on the back of an ATV. Whether you're separate or on the same ATV, it's still loud. You're cruising around. You can't have any real meaningful, communication or talking. So all you're really getting out of it is sort of like body language and things like that. And just, seeing how somebody's responding or reacting to something, which sure has value, but I feel like it has a lot less value than if you're doing something you can actually have communication. This is like a worse form of bowling in some ways, right? And so I didn't like it as a date. It just like also didn't really go anywhere or do anything. It felt really boring fast. Like if you blinked, you sort of missed it. They end up in the hot tub. And this is actually one of my criticisms of the entire episode is we've seen some really great deep conversations in this show. And last week I felt like they had sort of, dipped down and weren't as deep. And this episode in particular, I didn't really count any meaningful conversation that was happening. And I don't know if that was just a production edit, or if it's just kind of dissipating as things sort of break down. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed. They do talk about her inability to pick good men. She's been divorced a couple times. She talked about her struggles as a single mother. And so there was some conversation there that were relevant. But I'm not really sure that those types of conversations are really going and furthering the goal and getting closer to where Gerry would probably need to be in order to pick Leslie as a final as his choice at the end of this. I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there was one like nonverbal communication thing that happened that I thought was like sweet on Gary's end, which is when they were on the ATVs and Leslie was like kind of trailing far behind, and he was saying to the camera, I was feeling very protective of her, and he kept looking back and seeing that she was behind him, and then he let her go in front of him so that he could be behind her and like kind of like support her basically. And I thought that was like really sweet and intuitive and a nice gesture because Leslie seemed uncomfortable.
See, I had a different response to that entirely. So, we took separate cars to dinner last night. Where did I drive relative to you?
Behind me, always.
Always. I'm always driving behind you. I would never even think to get in front of you, right? The fact that he even started in front of her, again, I thought was a demonstration of poor judgment and a little bit, I thought that was a little bit weird.
So what you were saying is that Gerry and Leslie had a conversation where we got to know Leslie a little bit more and got to know her relationship history and her dating history and the fact that she's been a single mom for 22 years. But it sounds like you're saying that's nice to know, but how did that deepen your connection together?
Not just deepen the connection, but also how did it really give Gerry information that he would use as a positive check in the pro category is what I would say.
Well, it's because as Gerry says, what really matters to him ultimately, I love the way you look at me. That's what he came away with.
So this when you mentioned earlier, like this is another example of Gerry being the lead and it going a little to his head, do we think?
Well, it's just, listen, I'm gathering my thoughts and my words because I don't want to say anything too out of pocket here. But one of the things that I find so disappointing, or maybe it's us, maybe we were bad at assessing, but I feel like we had come into this season feeling like, okay, this is a man who knows about love. And I'm not saying that he doesn't, but now I'm really curious about what his definition or understanding of love is. And it's always a red flag to me when someone thinks of love as a way of how someone else makes them feel. That's a selfish type of love, and only thinking about like, if the only reasons that I said that I love you are because you make me feel so confident, you make me feel so cared for, you make me feel like I can do anything, that's selfish. That's not love.
I completely agree. This in some ways kind of reminds me of like junior high love, right? And where you don't really understand your feelings and these emotions yet, and you just know that there's this great infatuation. And so everyone's all about like, oh, I just need to spend time and need to talk to this person because it makes me feel really, really great. But the reality is that infatuation actually gets in the way of love, because as you point, it is absolutely selfish. It is all about how you are being it's all about how you feel and how this person is messing with the endorphins in your brain. Has nothing to do with the other person. And as we talk about all the time, love is an action. Love is putting somebody else first. Love is the process of sacrificing your well-being for somebody else's. Infatuation and this whole, the way you look at me and the way you make me feel is contra to love. It is what gets in the way of demonstrating love. And so, yeah, I completely 100% agree with you. That being said, I love the way that I feel when you look at me.
Selfish asshole. So anyway, their date was sort of
very meh.
So Gerry gives her a rose for the one-on-one.
Saw that coming, no surprise.
Of course. And then we roll into the cocktail party and the rose ceremony.
So Ellen, she does the I think I'm falling in love with you speech. We've seen this in various iterations of this show. I don't know if it was genuine or not, but forget about Ellen's side of it. I didn't feel like Gerry's response was particularly genuine. He did some face-to-camera stuff, and nothing he was saying was particularly Ellen-centric, right? And so it just, the way it was framed and the way it was edited led me to believe that, they're on different pages. And the fact that, he sort of responded the way he did, I don't know. It felt like sort of a not a low character moment, but a weak back moment is what it felt like to me, right? You talked last week about, having a weak back and what that indicates. This felt like a weak back moment, but what were your thoughts?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a weak back moment. I think we see Gerry's grief emerge because, as you're saying, we're hearing him in the face to camera talk about and think about the last time he heard someone look at him in that way and say those words, and that was with his wife. And of course, that brings such a flood of memories and probably emotions, whether that's excitement and guilt, like that kind of oscillation that I keep bringing up as it relates to grief. And then I think it also instills some hopefulness for him, and just the realization that he never really thought or believed that he would feel these things, or that he might hear them from someone else. And so it probably is such an overwhelming experience for him. And coupled with, we don't know how he really feels about Ellen. I'm making an assumption that they're not on the same page, or maybe he has, strong affectionate feelings for her, but not to that level. And there might be some guilt associated with that too, because she's just gone through saying, I almost forgot what it's like to be in love, and I'm falling in love with you. And then, what it might feel like to, again, have going through your own process of emotions, and maybe not. And maybe her saying that makes you realize, oh, we're actually not on the same page. So I didn't necessarily think it was weak back. I thought it was more like an overwhelm of probably so many complicated, conflicting emotions about so many different things at once.
All right, that's fair. So then let's roll into what I thought was kind of another, in my opinion, weak back moment. I'm interested to see if you disagree with this one as well. So Nancy pulls him aside. She basically sits Gerry down and in a very nice and sweet way basically says, you're a nice guy, but I don't think that our relationship is strong enough relative to some of the other women. So I'm going to basically self-eliminate, I think is the term that the nation uses, right? And so I had a couple of feelings about this. On the one hand, Nancy throwing in the towel, we've seen her, get emotional. We know that she's got some feelings about some stuff going on. So the first question I have is she self-eliminating because she really doesn't see it with Gerry? Is it because she's having too many other emotions? I don't think any of it really matters. She doesn't owe him like an honest reason why, and her justification is perfectly acceptable. And so great. So she wants to go. That's not really my complaint, though. My complaint is, in the last 2 episodes, Gerry has shown an unwillingness to engage in certain types of difficult conversations. And I feel like, did Nancy sort of let him off the hook here? It was, the way he responded to her, he's like, I think I'm going to go home. This is good. It's like, I don't disagree. See ya. And it was just kind of like, but it was such a way of like, it looked like he had like relief on his face. Like, oh, great. I don't have to, it's one more rose. I don't have to, it's, one more person who's going to cry and be disappointed. One more heart I'm not going to have to break. So I just feel like I wish she hadn't let him off the hook. I wish she had stuck around. She only had to stick around for a few more hours for the rose ceremony.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I read it was, I didn't think she was into him from that episode with the wedding dress. And so like my immediate thought when she came out in the cast and then sat down, I was like, she's not going to waste time here. She's probably so uncomfortable and in pain and is really not like that into this guy. And it's like, what am I doing here? I'm not going to waste time. And I feel like that's been also the theme of the show for so many of these women. Like, my time, my clock is ticking. I got to go. And so that was more how I saw it. But yeah, I think that Gerry didn't lament and tell her how disappointed he was or yada, yada, yada in the way that he did with Joan also speaks to his ambivalence about Nancy as well. Yeah. There was no connection there. So then we see another kind of one-on-one moment, Gerry and Susan, and he gives her a gift. He brings her a rose quartz crystal.
A rock. He gave her a rock. He went outside, dug it out of the ground, brushed that thing off, ran under some water, and was like, here you are, have a rock.
Not quite. It was in a nice little, black box.
It was sweet. You know, apparently what was it? Rose quartz.
Rose quartz, which symbolizes empathy and strength.
Yep.
And those qualities remind him of Tony.
You know what I realized? I actually saw when I was scrolling through some of the promotional material, I actually saw a picture of Tony. And I think of all of the women, Susan resembles Tony the most. I think that there's a massive height difference between the two of them, but in terms of just like they're both, you know, brown hair, they both have kind of somewhat similar facial features. So I wonder if how much that is playing into Gerry's, because Susan hasn't been on a lot of dates, hasn't gotten a one-on-one. They haven't had a lot of time together. You know, I mean, we've seen a lot of her, but I feel like the audience has seen more of Susan than Gerry has. And so it was very interesting that he gave her this gift with a meaning that indicates a certain level of understanding about who a person is, when we just haven't seen that, you know, in the show itself. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. So I don't know if you remember what Tony looks like and if you agree or disagree, but yeah, I found that whole thing interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely meaningful that he, again, went out of his way to get this gift, very personal thing, and give it to her at the evening of a rose ceremony. So there must be more to their relationship than we're seeing. But you're right, as the audience, she seems like kind of the mom of the group. She cooks for them. She's
does their hair.
She seems fun. I mean, she seems great.
Not as much fun as April.
I know. Well, let's segue into, then we get to the rose ceremony. Gerry only has 4 roses to give out because he's already given one to Sandra and one to Leslie.
So the people who end up at roses at the end of this are Leslie, Susan, Sandra, Faith, Ellen, and Teresa.
Which means that Kathy and April get eliminated.
And Nancy self-eliminated. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I alluded to this earlier in the podcast. What really disappoints me is I feel like Sandra got the rose that really could have gone to April. I was really sad to see April go. I liked her a lot. We've talked about it. She's been a favorite of ours. Reminds me so much of my mother in so many ways, and just funny, kooky, just entertaining. The outro of this week was her doing like some sort of incense, saging, burning thing to get rid of the spirits in the house or whatever. Like just fun, just a fun personality. I do hope that Bachelor production people, ABC. She's the Golden Bachelorette. Just cast her right now and let's just be done with that.
Her limo exit was perfectly teed up to be Golden Bachelorette.
Yeah, I mean,
that was her audition right there.
Yeah, look, just book her now and let's just be done with it. She's going to be fantastic. So let's just get that done. Get her under contract. Yeah, so that was really the only disappointing thing. I obviously we've never thought that Kathy could go the distance. Nancy, there was no connection there. And so I don't think that Sandra has the right value system to win this thing. So I would have liked to have seen April get that rose, but outside of that, I don't think there were any big surprises here.
Nope. And Gerry lets us know that at the end of next week, we will meet the women that go to hometowns, or that we go to hometowns with. So we really are getting down to the wire here. So usually that means we have 4 people to go to hometowns with. So we'll see if they kind of stay in that format, but we're almost there.
So we got 2 people to go then, which do we want to handicap who we think it's going to be?
I think it's pretty obvious. I think Susan and Sandra are going to be the ones eliminated.
I think Susan and Sandra, I agree with you. I think it's actually going to be, I agree with you on Sandra. I think it's going to be Ellen.
You think Ellen's going to get eliminated?
I think, yeah. I think we agree on Sandra. I think Ellen is 5 and you think Susan is 5.
Yeah. All right. I guess we'll see.
We're taking bets.
Okay. What do you want to bet?
That's for a different show also.
Okay. So
gonna get us censored.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this episode, but we do have a B-side where we are going to be giving our reactions and thoughts to The Bachelor in Paradise, episode 4. And then we will be back next week with Reactivity TV, where we will be giving my therapist opinion and Chris's reactions to The Golden Bachelor and Bachelor in Paradise episodes 5. And also we have another podcast, by the way. Well, not we. I have another podcast, Wishing You Well, which is a wellness focused podcast that I do with my wonderful co-host, Catherine Van Eyck, who is actually a licensed therapist. And we help everyone navigate their wellness journey because wellness is so important, but is different for everyone. So we have really great and interesting conversations over there with some really cool guests. So go check that out. You can also follow along with us on our Instagram page at Revive CFW. You can follow me at Amy Albero LCSW, and you can check out our website, revivecfw.com. But until then, we're wishing you well. We'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.